Well, we hear often these days that society shouldn't have any absolute moral standards. Imposing standards is oppressive, judgmental, and outdated. Like Linus in The Great Pumpkin, it doesn't matter what we choose to believe as long as we're really sincere in believing it. Well, pardon me for pointing it out, but that's stupid. And I'm sorry, Linus. You see, there are all sorts of absolute standards to which we adhere. A rock band might be filled with a group of nonconformists, but they can't each play in whatever key they feel like. It becomes chaotic noise and nothing resembling music, not even grunge. You might concede Hannibal Lecter's sincere belief in cannibalism, but you wouldn't go to his house for dinner. It seems counterintuitive, but freedom can't work unless we all agree to abide by certain basic standards of right and wrong. And when we step outside those boundaries, chaos ensues. That can leave a bad taste in your mouth. And I'm not still referring to Hannibal Lecter. Let me illustrate the concept with a story from the days when my own kids were young. When my oldest son, John Mark, was only 12, he decided one day to bake a cake. My wife, Janet, and I returned home, and we were greeted by our son proudly offering old Dad the first taste. Well, it looked good, and I was already preparing some fatherly praise as I took that first bite. But what came out of my mouth wasn't words. It was the cake. It was so awful, I had to spit it out. And my first thought was, my son was trying to kill me for the insurance. But as soon as my tongue overcame its shock, I asked John Mark if he'd used a recipe. He said that he had, and then he said that he followed it to the letter. Well, except he didn't know what a dash of salt meant, so he decided that a cup of salt ought to be plenty. Now, the only value of that cake would have been for some cows to lick it. Now, my son worked hard on that cake. He had the best of intentions, and he sincerely believed he'd done a good job. But hard work, good intentions, and sincere beliefs meant nothing once he decided that he could make up his own measurement standards. That's literally a recipe for disaster. And it's a disaster in the kitchen, in the music hall, in manufacturing a car, and trying to run an orderly society and community. You see, freedom can't exist in a moral vacuum. It just can't. It makes some people uncomfortable to hear this, but without clear boundaries of right and wrong, the very concept of liberty breaks down. A person might argue he should be free to look at pictures that others find offensive. But what if it's a photo of a child who's being exploited? Then there's a lot more at stake than just the liberty of the viewer. There was a big controversy over separating children from parents who crossed the border illegally, but very few people brought up the facts that the parents of those children chose to bring their children along as they knowingly violated federal immigration law, or that, as a pilot DNA test program proved, in many of the cases, those weren't even parents, but they were people exploiting children they weren't even related to. Self-government can't mean each of us lives by our own unique set of rules. If that's how you define liberty, then you're just going to get less of it. In fact, that's not liberty, it's license to live in complete selfishness. When people live outside the boundaries of a principled and agreed upon moral code, it always, and I mean always, leads to a government that's bigger and more intrusive, just to force people to do the right thing, not to mention creating an avalanche of lawsuits. If you think more lawyers and bigger government actually improve society, I've got a delicious cake recipe I'd love to sell you. Then again, no. Taking your money for that cake recipe would definitely be morally wrong.
Now, if you're seeing this, I know you've enjoyed that video. I mean, how could you not, after all? So you know what you should do? Leave a like, click on the subscribe button below, and hit the notification bell next to it so you'll always know when I have another video up for you to enjoy.